This laundry room is a wreck. Cheap home store shelving and rack, clutter everywhere. It just makes it super stressful to work in and move around. I've been asked to completely redesign the entire room using the following constraints. It must have a place to hang clothes on hangers, fold clothes, integrated drying rack, convenient place to store and access detergents, as much cabinet space as possible, and it must cost less than $1,000. We're gonna be pushing it on that budget, but I think we can pull this off. Let's get to it.
I used Fusion 360 to brainstorm the designs and come up with what I thought were creative solutions to the problems that would fit inside the room and the budget. Then I made a quick trip to Lowe's to pick up the first materials. Current project tally, $784.94. I started by building the cut list from the rendering, and since it was a beautiful day outside, I finished all my long cuts in the driveway, then moved inside to start assembling the shelves. I'm fairly new to custom cabinetry, but I do love the process, so I've been experimenting with different folks' suggestions on the best way and making notes on what I'll do different next time. On the last set I built, I used the build the base first method, and on this set I'm using the build the base into the sides method. I've learned a lot already and plan to share my notes after a few more projects in another video. But the hardest lesson learned so far, whenever possible, paint these things before you move and hang them. But more on that in a bit. With all the shelves built, I started framing out the faces. Since we're going to paint these anyways, I went with 1x3 pine and used pocket holes for the horizontal stiles and center support. Then I used a pin nailer to attach each one to its shell with minimal damage to the face itself.
How about that? Now I just need to sand that down flat and it's ready for paint. Groovy. That looks good. Looks good.
After this, I realized it was much easier to sand them first and then attach them to the shell. So as I finished each one, my lovely assistant applied a couple coats of paint to each cabinet. That is until we ran out of paint, which required another trip to Lowe's. Current total, $886.69. With the cabinet shells painted, I started hanging them up and making sure everything worked as expected before making all the doors. And to my genuine surprise, everything lined up perfectly and looked great. I kicked off the door making process by double and triple recalculating the rail and stile lengths for each cabinet door. Once I was sure everything was correct, I cut them all out on the miter saw and then dragged out the beast. This is a Laguna 3 horsepower shaper, and it scares the out of me. It routinely snatches lumber from my push blocks and either throws it back at me angrily or tries to pull me into its maw. I have no reason to believe it doesn't crave human flesh, so I'm extremely cautious with it. I run each of the rails and stiles down the groove bit first to create the channel where the inner cabinet door will rest. Then I use a sled to carve the tongue into each side of the stiles so they'll fit snugly into the groove we just cut. I cut out one door center from a 1/4 inch sheet of plywood for a quick test fit. And since everything worked as expected, I cut out the rest on the table saw and started gluing and clamping. After the glue dried, we added some caulk around the inside to clean up the edges a bit. Then I sanded down each door to get ready for paint. Since I completed this project during the holidays, at this point in the build we really needed to get all the junk off the dinner table and into those cabinets. So I took a break to install the shelves. We cut up and reused the laminate shelves we already had, but unfortunately we didn't have enough. So that necessitated another trip to Lowe's and busted our budget. But the show must go on.
Okay, now that the paint is drying on the doors and the shelves are in and she's able to go ahead and start putting stuff on the shelves, clean up that dinner table, it's time to start working on this drying rack apparatus that I've sort of envisioned in the drawing. I haven't given a whole lot of thought to how it works, but I'm kind of working through that now mechanically and looking in the space to see how I can make that work while also providing support for that really long extra shelf up there and then also not look terrible. Nothing to it but to do it. Let's give it a go.
With the budget blown, I decided to reuse as much stock and scrap as I could from the shop to avoid running that number up even higher. I assembled the frame for the drying rack and trimmed it out using scrap pieces. Then, using a bucket and the bandsaw, fashioned some decorative curves for the overhead clothes hangers. Now I just need to build the folding area and detergent storage. Using some scrap plywood and pine facing, I built some cubbies the exact height and width to fit between the washer and dryer and to support the folding area we planned. The challenge here is going to be making the top without further breaking the bank. Past dust to the rescue. I found these old edge-glued boards that I used when I built my very first table about 20 years ago. I disassembled that table a few months back to save space, and it will find new life here in the laundry room. But first, we got to do something about that color. I cut the two pieces down to size and sent them through the drum sander to create a fresh, clean surface. Then jointed the two edges and glued them together overnight.
All right, this is by far the worst part of the project, and that's painting. I hate painting with the heat of 1,000 suns, but it's necessary evil. And unfortunately, I've got an HVLP gun, but it's just really cold outside, and I don't really have a good place that I'm not just going to ruin everything in the garage. I guess I could put down a bunch of plastic. I don't know, there's excuses. We started rolling the cabinets is the gist, which means we're going to finish rolling the cabinets. And so it looks good. I mean, we're liking it. It's just taking a little longer than probably it would if we had done it, with a spray gun.
So while the tabletop was drying, I put another coat of paint on the shelving. Ultimately, we put numerous coats of paint on over the course of a week. I've since ordered a paint booth, so I never have to face this dilemma again. The next day, I removed the top from the clamps and sanded it down nice and smooth. I added a small notch in the back for the dryer plug to fit through and softened all the edges before applying a pre-stain treatment. The pre-stain treatment requires that you wait 4 hours before applying the actual stain, but as many other YouTube gurus have shown, it's definitely worth the extra time for how good it turned out. I added 3 coats of Performance Finishes gloss and installed it in the laundry. Now to hang up the rods for the clothes hangers and drying racks. When we were discussing the drying rack, we decided on chrome poles instead of the basic white ones, reasoning that it would look better, but not considering how much more expensive they would be. I also miscalculated how many we were going to need, so I had to go back to Lowe's, Home Depot, and Amazon to get enough chrome rods and mounting brackets for this part of the project. I do think this was a cool use of that space, and you can see from the reused white rod at the top, it definitely looks better, over budget or not. After over a week of work between juggling the holidays and normal responsibilities, all that's left is attaching the handles and adjusting the hinges, and this rebuild is done. And as it turns out, with the unused materials returned, the final tally was much better than I'd previously thought. I already had extra cabinet hardware from previous projects, so the final spend ended up at $1,063.35, which is pretty darn close.
Well, that wraps up this project, and I think we accomplished nearly all of our goals. We've got plenty of cabinet space now. It looks way less cluttered. Usable space over here to hang clothes, to dry clothes, place for the hampers so they're not in the main throughway here. Excellent place here to just fold clothes straight out of the dryer. Storage for the detergent and everything right there, really close. After the returns, we ended up getting really close to that budget, just barely over, and I'm okay with that, especially for how it looks and how much better it makes us feel walking through this area. So with all those problems solved, it's time to move on to the next project. If you thought this was helpful or interesting, please hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. It really does make a difference, especially to YouTube. And if you'll check out the link in the description, it's got plenty of information about the materials and the tools that I used in this build, along with social media information. Love it if you'd follow me over there. Check out my Patreon when the time is right. I'd really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching. See you next time.